Welcome to the Caregivers podcast. This is episode 27. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Ropeleski, and you can call me Dr. Mark. Sometimes the person the world expects you to care for is that same person who taught you to abandon yourself. Well, today we're talking about what happens when a child who survived the parent becomes the adult expected to save them. Our guest today is Heather Gray, a licensed mental health professional whose work focuses on trauma, family systems, and the lasting impact of difficult parent-child dynamics. In this conversation, she helps us understand what people mean when they talk about emotionally immature parents, why caregiving can reactivate old wounds, and how adult children can actually protect themselves when walking away is not an option. The best way to support the show is simple. Please follow us. Subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It makes a real difference and helps us reach more caregivers who need to hear these messages and these conversations. Thanks for being here. Heather, there's a term that's exploded online over the last couple of years, emotionally immature parents. But for caregivers, this is not just a label. It can mean managing medications, paperwork, phone calls, crises, and the same old emotional damage all at once. I want this episode to help people understand what they're dealing with, how to name it clearly, and what to do if they can't just walk away. Welcome, Heather Gray. Here we are at the Caregivers podcast. We have an amazing show in store today. I'd like to kick it right off and jump into this. When people say emotionally immature parents, what do they actually mean by that?
So I think it's a couple of things, but when someone is emotionally immature, it means that they don't have the capacity to connect with other people and the way that the social or societal norms would be able to do. So the idea being that when someone's emotionally immature, the way they look at the world and the way they move through the world is through a broken lens. So as a result, it regularly creates disconnects in what their perception of reality is versus how the person in relationship might be perceiving that.
What breaks that lens to begin with?
It can be a lot of things. The most significant thing that impacts people is how they were raised in their childhood. So whether or not their emotional needs were met in their developmental years really impacts their ability to view the world as a safe and trusting place. And when they don't grow up in a world where their needs are met, where they see the world as a place that can meet their needs and can take care of them, then they start to feel as though they have to take care of themselves. And then as a result, they build all of these adaptations. Sometimes it happens right in childhood. Sometimes trauma that happens after childhood can impact it. But it really is this idea being that I can't trust the world, or I can't trust other people, or I can't trust the people closest to me to take care of me. So I have to do that myself. And then that creates a disconnect in relationships with people.
So is the term emotionally immature parent a diagnosis? Is it a personality pattern, a trauma response, or just kind of a useful way of describing harmful behavior?
Sure. I think it's a little TikTok therapy. I think people like the idea of being able to find something that explains their situation. I do think as a result, it creates a lot of ambiguity and it creates a lot of confusion. It also makes it really easy in a moment of tough conflict or a moment of difficulty to just be like, you're emotionally immature. So, for example, I have a practice in a community of daughters who have been raised by what I call narcissistic mothers or emotionally limited mothers. And I have switched to emotionally limited because I think it allows for a little grace in terms of acknowledging that some people are simply incapable. Emotionally immature often speaks to what it feels like to be on the other side of someone who doesn't have that capacity and doesn't have that ability.
So how then would an emotionally mature parent be different, let's say, from a parent who's simply mean, selfish, narcissistic, and even abusive?
How would an emotionally mature parent, or how would
No,
an
or
emotion?
no, an emotionally immature parent. So I'll repeat it. How is an emotionally immature parent different from a parent who's just plain mean and abusive and narcissistic and
I
selfish?
think oftentimes I would say there's not a difference. They're one and the same. That an emotionally immature person is incapable of connecting with others in a way that's more attuned, more relational, more social, that allows for more reciprocity. And
Hmm.
then one of the ways they manage their inability to do that is by being mean, is by using power and control, using influence, in all of the different protective strategies that they would use for themselves to protect their story about themselves. So, for example, a lot of people like to put this in the narcissism category. I actually think it's a little more broader than that. But the idea being that, people who are emotionally immature, limited, or otherwise incapable are largely trying to protect themselves from the narrative of that. So they carry so much shame about their inability to move through the world in a way that's normal, that the things that they do are all designed to protect the truth coming out, that they don't want anybody to find that out. It's as if the gig would be up. So they work really hard in a variety of ways to control and change the narrative so that they remain in charge of it.
So kind of like settling for looking through the broken lens as opposed to getting a fresh lens and not being sure what you're going to see.
Yes, yes. I think that there are people who, as a result of the way they were raised or their life experiences of what was modeled for them, learn bad habits or learn bad examples. But then when they don't get their need met, so, think about a woman who's raising a daughter the way her parents raised her. And at some point, her daughter says, I can never talk to you. You don't listen to me. I don't want to talk to you. I'm not telling you anything. One kind of mother would be like, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. I so want my daughter to feel safe talking to me. I so want to have a better connection. And that kind of person might go and learn about it and self correct or try to self correct and figure out where they went right or wrong of center. But then there's a different kind of parent and a different kind of adult relationship where that capacity doesn't even exist because they don't see that interaction in the same way. So when the daughter says that to them, they're not self reflecting. They're not thinking there might be any accuracy in the story. They're immediately assuming that the way they are looking at the situation is accurate. That broken lens is their truth. It becomes not up for debate.
Must be good fuel for fight or flight.
A lot of fuel for fight or flight on both
S-
sides. A lot of emotionally limited people, they don't connect to cause and effect. They don't connect to, oh, I interrupted or I did this and that made the person's head go back. They immediately think the person's head went back and they disrespected me. And what that is a change in energy for them. I think a lot of times people assume that narcissists or emotionally limited people or emotionally immature people, whatever we're calling them, like know what they're doing and are doing it deliberately. And it's not my experience that that's true. More often, they are responding to a perceived threat, a perceived shift in energy, a perceived sort of slight or disrespect, and they're working to shift that energy. And they use a series of learned behaviors that they have learned effectively over time to do that by minimizing, diminishing, lying, blaming, shaming, doing all of those, so-called mean behaviors. They're
mhm.
responding to a shift in the other person, and they're trying to get that shift adjusted so that they can maintain the facade and the way they look to other people.
So when does parental emotional immaturity actually just cross that line into pure emotional abuse?
I think a lot of people are going to look at this and answer that question differently. What I would look at it as is there's a difference between somebody having a bad day, losing their patience, losing their minds, losing their ish, and sort of coming back and saying, "Gosh, like I didn't mean to do that. Like what happened to me? Or I was tired, or I should have had another cup of coffee." But we all are going to make mistakes. We're all going to be imperfect. We're not going to be our best selves every day. I think it becomes abusive when it becomes the pattern, when it becomes the mode of operation, the regular everyday experience of what it feels like to be on the receiving end. That being said, some of these emotionally people that we're talking about have developed patterns where it isn't like so obvious. It's way more covert, it's way more subtle, and it becomes like I might have an outburst every 3 months and I might look perfectly fine for 3 months. But in those 3 months, everyone around me is on pins and needles and eggshells trying to avoid
Okay.
the next outburst. So it's not
Right.
like this is going to be your interaction with me every single time. It's going to be I'm always creating an energetic field. So
Hmm.
you were aware of me and you're paying attention to me.
So for our listeners, then, I mean, it's really easy to hone in on like the obvious sort of black and white destructive behavior. But what does emotional immaturity look like actually? And you kind of already alluded to it when it's really subtle. And
So
when people, what brings people to walking on eggshells? What's that subtle behavior, that subtle nuance that keeps the whole process going?
Sure. So when you're on the receiving end, particularly when you're a kid, you are learning very quickly what pleases the adults around you, what gets your needs met around you, and what allows you to basically survive. And so what a child on the receiving end of that is doing is constantly scanning for who do I need to be and how do I need to show up in order to get my needs met. And so what they will learn over time is they have to be a certain way to get a certain result. And so a lot of this, an important part of this discussion is the nervous system because our nervous systems have these like neuroceptors and they are lightning fast and they exist in our perception of reality before we can connect head and mind and heart and have words come out. So our
Hmm.
nervous system is scanning for threat. And for when people developmentally and historically haven't had their needs met, their nervous systems are wired to learn the threats of safety, what they need to do, how they need to be, how they need to show up in order to get their needs met. And so it becomes connected to their patterned experience with their care provider or the people that they're in close relationship with.
So that definitely sets the stage for everybody being on eggshells. And I can imagine now when we transition to the caregiving arena, what are the consequences for an adult caregiver when the immature parent's behaviors transition from the subtle to the destructive?
S- So usually by the time an adult needs to do caregiving for someone else, that has long been established through a lifetime of behavior. And the biggest impact on it is that an adult caregiver is now taking care of the person who didn't take care of them.
Hmm.
And so sometimes it becomes like what feels like an act of self betrayal. It brings up a lot of those unmet needs, like, oh, I'm bathing you, I'm feeding you, I'm taking you to the doctors, I'm listening to all your ailments in a way that you never did for me. And it can remind, someone who's in that caregiving position of all the needs that didn't get met. They also sometimes fall into the patterned expectation of how they're expected to be, either because of the societal expectations or because their parents raised them to think a certain way about it.
Hmm.
But either way, they're navigating caring for the person who didn't care for them. And that gets messy and complicated.
Treacherous waters.
Yes.
So, but a lot of adult children will say, my childhood kind of looked pretty good from the outside. And, now they're hearing all about emotionally immature parents. It's a popular sort of thing that's out there online. How do they identify now in hindsight if, that pattern was actually a reality in their life growing up, even though it seemed fine? Are
Mhm.
people sort of forced at that transition of caregiving into a retrospective review, and then suddenly it's like, oh my God?
Yes, it does happen like that, actually. I see that very often. I see a lot of moments of awareness. The first moment of awareness that your needs were not met as a child is often when you become a parent yourself. Because suddenly you realize that your mother or your father used words that you can't imagine using with your own child, or made choices and made decisions that you can't possibly imagine doing with your own kid. So that becomes like one of those lightning rod moments where light dawns over Marblehead, and it's this awareness. But then there is this other pivotal time when suddenly the emotionally unavailable person needs something from their child, and the adult child's body will react. More often than not, if people and caregivers slow themselves down, their bodies will tell them the truth. There is a difference between showing up to care for someone tired and showing up to care for someone scared, or out of obligation, or out of pressure, or out of manipulation. And oftentimes, adults are really good at talking themselves out of their lived truth and their experience. But if they slow themselves down, their bodies are actually telling them everything they need to know.
What does that feel like?
For different people, it's going to feel different things. I often hear it lands in your chest with a thud. It feels as if it's harder to do the thing you would normally want to do for someone else. So if your best friend is sick, you think about the casserole, and you think about making sure her kid has childcare, and you make sure that whoever normally waters the lawn is watering the lawn, and it becomes an easy give because
Hmm.
that relationship has deposited into you. When you're caring for someone who never cared for you, resentment is most often that signal of, oh, shouldn't I want to do this? I'm a helpful person in other areas. I don't mind listening to other people. I don't mind helping other people. Why am I suddenly struggling to help this person? What's it about this? And getting curious. Oftentimes, people don't do that though. They white knuckle, they grit their teeth, they suck it up. They don't spend time saying like, "Whoa, I'm kind of uncomfortable here, and where is this discomfort coming from, and what is my body trying to tell me?" So often it's, we fall into the trope of, this is my responsibility, this is what I have to do, so I'm not going to question it.
And if I do question it, I'm a bad person. And then
Yes.
that's the next stage. So really, there's subtle signs that can emerge when an adult child is called to caregive, and they realize that they're not just helping a parent, but there's more to the story here. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
they're almost sounds like they're being pulled back into maybe what became a successfully occluded survival mode, but now it's coming back.
Yes.
Would
Yes.
that be accurate?
Yes, because if you think about it, if you were raised by an emotionally limited person and your needs are not getting met, haven't been gotten met, you will eventually leave that cocoon. You go to school, you get a job, you create your own family, and there creates space and changes the level of intimacy in a relationship. When someone starts needing care, that situation is demanding a return to a more intimate existence where there's less space, there's less control, there's more sort of prove positive for an increased need in contact. So more frequency, more intensity, more duration. And that is what's going to flag the nervous system that this isn't safe. I am somewhere I don't want to be. I'm doing something I don't want to be doing, because they're returned to that close, intimate relationship where sometimes life has given you space. I don't think that there's a moment where somebody who's caring for their adult parent, like, isn't aware that they're caring for their adult emotionally limited parent. I don't think they've gone like 45 years, 50 years and suddenly doing this and have never known. They just have never taken it as seriously. And the pressure gets put on the valve when suddenly they're asked or called or requested or needed to be a caregiver. It's not that they didn't know their parents were a pain in the neck and difficult to deal with, and hard to deal with or hurtful or mean. They've always known, but they found a way of organizing around it. And the need for caregiving puts that pressure on the valve.
It certainly would make one think that caregiving almost reactivates a series of old roles really quickly. But why does it get reactivated so quickly, even perhaps in people who thought they had moved on and actually healed? I mean, is caregiving for an immature parent almost like a boundary buster and everything crumbles again and needs to be rebuilt?
I think it's different for how, depending on how people have come on the other side of this
Hmm.
experience. And I think sometimes there are people who are showing up for caregiving because it's expected, because that's what they've been told to do. That's what they think they have to do. So there's an absence of choice. There's an absence of, I am showing up to caregive for this person because I am putting a deposit into this relationship. This is a meaningful relationship to me, and I am doing this from choice. A lot of people are overriding the idea that they haven't consciously chosen to be there. So much of the reactivity is the loss of control. And one of the ways, even when you're caring for someone who didn't care for you, to get back in control is to consciously make that choice to say, my mom has had a really tough go of it for several months, and she and I do not have a good relationship, but I'm looking left and right of center. There's no one else here. I'm going to be the one who takes her to the doctors. I'm going to be the one who makes sure her medication gets filled. I'm going to be the one to make sure that her home has enough room for medical equipment. I am going to consciously choose to do that. Even if it means I don't want to, I'm resentful, this woman's never taking care of me, why am I taking care of her? It realigns the caregiver with their own personal value of how they want to move through the world and how they choose to be, who they choose to be as they move through the world, rather than I am responding out of duty. I am responding because it's been assigned to me. I am assigned out of expectation. Because once you tune into choice, you get to say, as a person moving through this world with this difficult relationship, I am going to show up as a caregiver, but I'm also going to decide what caregiving looks like for me. And a lot of times we assume our daughters, and I work with daughters, so that's my go to, but the children assume that if they sign on to be a caregiver, they have to do all the things, rather than recognizing that when you are with someone who's difficult, caring for someone who's difficult, the only thing you're agreeing to in that choice is helping that person receive care. You don't have to, in line with your values, be the one making the meals, cooking the meals, doing the shopping, bringing the homemade in, doing all of this. You, as someone who's saying, I want to help my parent, can say, hey, my husband doesn't get as annoyed by my mom as I do. He's perfectly capable of bringing the groceries into the house. So I'm going to go grocery shopping, but I'm going to have him be the one who drops it off, because the two of them don't activate each other anymore as
Hmm.
much anymore. Or my sister is the one who can do some of that physical caretaking, but I'm the one who does better with the numbers and the banks. So how do we, given this situation, given what the needs are, how can we get them met? Rather than what I think a lot of adult children do is just assume it's all on them. It has to be them. It falls on them to do 100% of it. Rather than, no, if you're signing up for this, you're just signing up for your adult care, your parent getting care. How it gets done, there's a lot of flexibility in that.
So standing in the face of a call to caregiving for a parent who's been notoriously immature in their relationship with you, like what old roles sort of are awakened first? Is it the good daughter role, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the invisible child? Like is there a sort of a pattern that all of these sort of stack on each other, or do you tend to revert back to that old role that you had going way back?
Mostly it's who do I need to be to keep myself safe? So if they historically were the parentified child growing up, they might become the fixer as the caregiver. If they were the person who knew to just sort of stay out of the way, they may resort to more passive caregiving and not put themselves in front of the adult who is needing care at the moment. They're what they're trying to do more than anything is not be abused and not be seen as the problem. So through the course of their life in relationship with their parent, they've used a lot of adaptations. They've used a lot of different strategies. So they might fawn, they might be really irritated and pissed off, but never say so. They may apologize. They may overly function, overly manage, over communicate, all the overs in order to get the need met, to avoid getting in trouble, to avoid being accused of anything. It really depends on their individual experience and what safety feels like for them.
Is it harder at that stage to reestablish boundaries or reinforce boundaries that perhaps in the past served a purpose but now are called on even more?
Yes, if they've never done it before. So if you're an adult who like went along to get along, and you never called your mom out for her behavior, you never called your dad out for the nonsense he was doing, and then suddenly one of them needs something and you've never said no to them, and you've never said, I don't think I can do that, or I need someone else to do that, then your nervous system in your body is going to react to that as a threat, as danger. Like, whoa, we never say no to these people. What are you doing? What are you thinking about? The world is going to end. Everybody's going to say you're a bad daughter. Everybody's going to know. They're like, and the stack just goes up. If they've done boundary setting before, saying like, I'm sorry, no, you can't come to the house on Halloween. The kids are going to be out trick-or-treating, but we'll send you a picture. If you've set a boundary of like, no, we can't come to the house every Sunday for family dinner, we will come as our schedule allows. If you've had some practice at doing that and knowing and learning that the world doesn't end, then it isn't as hard when something physical like caretaking gets involved. But if you've never done that because you've just tried to like be the good daughter, be the good son, skate by, and the first thing you're doing is saying no to, I'm not taking care of you, then your whole body is going to react as if you were doing something really, really bad, because it has been conditioned over time, repetitively, since you've been a kid, to think of your parents first, to not think of yourself, to care for your parents first, to not consider yourself. So if you are 47, 55, 65, and you're saying no to your parent for the first time, like it's an assault on the system.
Watch out. You alluded to this earlier, but, some families, often end up sacrificing one adult child to carry the bulk of the care, the logistics, the emotional fallout of caregiving, while everyone sort of adjusts around that as though it's sort of normal. Walk us through
Yes.
the dynamics of how that forms and
Yes.
why sometimes it's just one amongst siblings who takes on the mother load.
Yes, that a lot can get connected all the way back to when everyone was living together as a nuclear family with all the kids in the house. Because kids and families, there's family systems. There's the person who does everything, the person who becomes the butt of everyone's joke, the person who's the troublemaker, the person who will acquiesce first, the person who's easiest to put the pressure valve on. So by the time an adult, a parent needs caregiving, everybody knows their family members. They know how to protect their own needs in their own time and their own schedule. They know who's going to break first. They know who, can respond to guilt more. So they will lean on the weakest link because learned patterns for their own systems of how they have protected themselves is by doing that. So if
Hmm.
there's someone who always says yes, who always, say there was a chore when everyone was kids to take out the trash and it's raining and, Sally was always the one who didn't mind going out in the rain to take out the trash, then Sally's going to become the person who has to go and change mom's bedpan because Sally historically has been the weakest link. Even if Sally's not physically strong enough to be the one to manage a chore like that, it will fall on Sally. At least they'll try to have it fall on Sally because she's the most reliable one to get that need met.
So is that dynamic interplay just pure raw dysfunction, or like can the whole family system become complicit in establishing and keeping one person over functioning so no one else needs to?
Yes. I actually think it's based on a lot of unwritten rules. I think the most important thing to kind of think about when we look at it from that lens is that none of this is ever spoken. It's not like there's a family meeting where the dad says, "So from here on out, so and so you were the family scapegoat, and so you're going to be the golden child, and so you're going to be this." These patterns and these roles and these assignments happened as a result of the ways the parents at the time wanted to get their needs met, wanted to, and that means like to control the family narrative and to control the family story. And so everyone in the family just like learns these patterned ways of moving through the world. And when the system is taxed with everybody now being a grown adult, some people have had life experiences between childhood and this caregiving episode that have taught them like, hey, you can say no. Hey, like you don't have to do that. That isn't your job. Or, the question I usually ask people I'm working with, if the answer wasn't always you, what other answer might exist? And recognizing that when one person in the pattern changes, everything changes. But that isn't always it's not always deliberate. Sometimes it's usually someone tripped on a wire, someone went left or right of center, and the whole thing kind of fell apart.
Well, it needs to be deliberate. It needs to be sequential, I think, and there needs to be group buy-in if some of that boundary setting is meant to happen that late in life, or a path towards
Yes.
initiating it. So when you're
Yes.
caring for an elderly, emotionally immature parent, you alluded to this earlier, but where does that crushing fear come from? That fear that if I step back, they will fall apart, they will become homeless, they're going to die, it's all going to be my fault.
Mhm. Experience, because that's what their pattern learning was. So over and over again in like rapid succession and with a lot of repetition as kids, they were taught that they were responsible for their parents' emotional well-being, or they were responsible for how well the family functioned, or whether or not needs got met, or whether or not so and so got taken care of. So when you become an adult and the parent is needing your care, a lot of this ends up being on automatic pilot. And the pressure comes from returning almost to the scene of the crime, going back to that place of like, oh, I've been here before. This is not the first time. Like the body remembers. The body like
That's
holds that
huge.
and
Hmm.
says like, oh, like this is happening again. We've been here before. We know, and then it goes either we know what we have to do now. We have to acquiesce. We have to say please and thank you. We have to go small. We have to like minimize the need. We have to act grateful for the opportunity to take care of you, mom and dad. We have to treat you like it is our greatest privilege in life to take care of you. Or it becomes the moment where the body says, not this time. We actually physically cannot take care of this person. And the body shuts down in a way of being protective because it can't handle that load of taking care of someone who hurt them.
And what does that body shutdown feel like in the experience of people you've worked with, or from
Mhm.
your understanding of the field? Like that's a dramatic moment where you're like, I can't do this, and I am
Mhm.
shutting down. I mean,
Mhm.
talk about that's there's a scene of the crime and there's a scene of the crime. I mean, that
Yes,
when you
yes,
are shutting down, faced
yes,
to
yes.
have to care give.
So I'm going to be really clear that I imagine this falls on gender lines, and I mostly work with women.
Hmm.
So what it looks like in a male body, I'm not entirely sure, but I can tell you that women will feel a tightening in their chest. Their eyes will well up with tears. They might get a burning sensation. Their throat tightens. They know that they're supposed to act, but they can't imagine going back. Or they go back, but they're like numbed out, tuned out, checked out, dissociated, disconnected from their self and their experience. So they're going through the motions, but their body is protecting them from the reality of caring for someone who never cared for them.
Is it fear, guilt, shame? What reactivates in those moments? Is it like a rapid sort of development of shame in those people who struggle with those moments, and shame probably being the worst scenario to find
Yes.
yourself in so acutely?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think so a lot of us, were raised with these programmed expectations of who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to move through the world in as adults when
Sociology,
our
yeah.
parents age, right? So there is this piece, but there's this, guilt is I did a bad thing. Shame is I am a bad person. And when you're a child who's been raised by an emotionally limited person, you are more often powered by shame because you have been told over and over again throughout your lives in ways that are implicit, explicit, and covert that you are not worth something unless you are in service to me or unless you are A, B, C, D, E, F. Like the expectations in each family system changes. So as soon as you are in a moment where you are expected to caregive, then and you don't caregive, you suddenly just think you're an awful person. But the other piece that I don't think gets talked about a lot
Let's
is
hear it.
really important in this conversation is that when your parent is at end of life or needs caregiving, because it's not always end of life, right? Like sometimes it's cancer and cancer gets better and the person goes on to live. But a lot of kids growing up are just waiting for their parents to see them, are just waiting to be acknowledged, or it's just waiting for attention to be seen as thoughtful and good and kind. So a lot of people don't go into these moments resentful. They go into them hopeful. Maybe this time my dad will see how much I love him. Maybe this time my mom will see how hard I try because I didn't go on my vacation and I took care of her and I didn't pick up the phone and I stayed at the doctor's office. Maybe this will be the thing that repairs our relationship. And it's this naive, blind little girl, little boy part of themselves that think maybe now will be my turn and I'll be seen and we can fix this. So they sometimes also go into this with an incredible amount of vulnerability and hope and all their defenses down. And then they're treated like poop. And then they're disrespected. And then they're told they didn't do it good enough. And they didn't leave the washcloth on the right side of the sink. And they didn't bring the right orange juice into the house. And what were they thinking being so loud? Didn't they know they were trying to sleep? And then suddenly it's, oh, even in this stage of life, my parent still can't see how hard I'm trying.
I wanted no pulp. How could you screw that up? Yeah, I hear
Yes.
you. And I think that's probably a really important message I'm hearing from you today, that people in their 50s and 60s who are starting to care for an elderly parent who wasn't there for them really need to tap into. It's that if you're going in with hope and expectations, be very mindful and reflective of what extra pressure you're putting on yourself. Because we all know that certain personality traits do not change.
Yes.
Oh,
Everybody becomes more themselves. Like, I think that, like, that's a really important thing to recognize, that if you were going to consciously decide to caregive for someone who didn't caregive, who didn't take care of you as a kid, that is very unlikely going to be the moment where suddenly everything shifts. So instead of going in with hope, you actually have to go in with armor. You have to go in protecting. I know who this person is. I know how they try to get my goat. I know how they try to influence me, and I am not giving them ammunition, and I'm protecting myself with armor.
that's a big conscious choice. And, it really begs the question is, how does an adult child actually come to that point of acceptance that their parent that they're now caring for will truly never become the parent they needed, even if it's towards the end of the parent's life?
Yeah. Some adult kids never do. I mean, I work with people all the time, and it's an endless journey of self-acceptance. Sometimes it is, I knew this and then I forgot it and I hoped it wasn't true, and oh, there's the reminder, and oh, okay, I'm getting reminded again. When What I really work with people on is the idea being is, can we say it may never, your wish, your hope for a better parent may never go away. You may always look and want and yearn and long, but can you choose to be a little more self protective? Because
Self-compassionate.
if someone is going to show up in a way that's different and more loving than they've ever done, then someone who's more loving, and even if they're newly more loving, will be respectful of armor, will be respectful of space. So you can go in with armor, and if the other person really is looking for a change, you will see that and feel it and be able to believe it and know that it's safe to put down the armor. But someone who is in need of care is not ever, like, not gonna be capable of not abusing you if they've always abused you. That's not suddenly gonna become a capable thing. So if you're gonna put yourself in the line of fire, then your job is to become self-protective.
And part of that must include accepting the possibility that that moment will never come where you
Yes.
are cared for, and then there's actually an awakening on the part of the parent. What,
Yes.
with your experience, what go what's the worst case scenario when a child who's now forced to be a caregiver faces that reality that change will never come? How can it manifest itself?
It'll usually manifest itself in some trauma response: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, some sort of shutdown, some sort of way of self-protection. But so often it is a little bit quieter. And what that really looks like is, I am looking outwardly at someone hoping for a different answer. Is there a way that I can start to believe me? rather than waiting for the other person to say so, giving all the power and control to the emotionally limited person to decide my sense of self. Is there a way that I can say I lived according to my own values? I did what I thought was the right thing to do. I made choices for myself that were consistent with myself. I did enough. I tried. I believe me. So often that's the moment is I'm not going to be looking at the other person for validation. I am going to give myself permission to validate that I have done enough. I tried enough. I worked hard enough. And and wherever the chips fall after that, I'm going to believe me. I think there's another piece to this, if it's okay that we extend this a little bit,
Oh,
is
absolutely. Because I have a
if
couple of
we're
questions that follow up to that too. Yeah.
sure. The other piece to this is, and this is where it gets tricky with end of life stuff in particular, is that a lot of people are being manipulated with wills and financial pressure and the idea of, if you don't do this for me, I'm going to cut you out of the will. If you don't do this for me, don't expect a cent. And so there is an element sometimes where people know they're dealing with a known abuser. They know they're dealing with someone who doesn't have their best interests at heart, isn't going to take care of them, and either feels like they financially need the results of that will, or again, it becomes identity of like, oh, if I'm not in the will, I've been erased. I'm not even considered someone significant in their lives. I'm not even somebody that they consider like an offspring or a loved one. So the other piece is that a lot of times people are looking at and showing up in caregiving ways from lots of different places and lots of different pressures. The most important way that someone can navigate this by taking care of themselves is by being honest with themselves about all of those dynamics, even if they don't say it out loud.
Hmm.
That, more than anything, is how you get out of this alive. Is I believe me, this is what this is why I'm choosing it, these are my values, and I am moving consistently with myself versus looking at the other person for that kind of validation.
It sounds like a very meticulous process to get to that point of acceptance and
Yes,
belief in yourself and what you stand for and what you can contribute. How
yes,
often do people slip along the way, turning to alcohol, drugs, other
yes.
outlets? Because hopelessness and the need for dopamine can sometimes just, uh, you know, cloud that path.
Yes. I imagine it's fairly common because those are things that stop you from feeling. So people lean on a lot of things that stop you from feeling. You can numb out on your phone, you can numb out with alcohol, you can numb out with drugs, pot, you can, numb out by sleeping a lot, by making other unhealthy choices. And so much of stopping that is by saying, this is really painful and this is really hard. And I am doing the very best I can. Because I think so often if someone else is ill or there's an illness on the other side, then it's like, I can't even think about myself right now. I'm supposed to be doing this. I'm supposed to be doing that. But the more you can acknowledge your own emotional experience, even if you don't tell anybody or you only tell your safe people, then the less you need to numb. But the numbing comes when you're not being honest with yourself, but the feelings are popping up anyway, and they're annoying and they're getting in the way of your ability to function or to show up. So you take the hit of pot, you have the drink in order to lower the temperature.
Certainly, community plays an important role in the community of safe people, and certainly through your work with Mayhem Daughters and your organization, I can see where that togetherness really sort of multiplies the benefits of having a safe space.
Yes.
What's it like for adult children who are witnessing the slow decline of a parent's health? all the while grieving the parent who actually never showed up, or grieving the parent they're still waiting for. That must be a really
Yes.
challenging scenario.
It it is. Where I put it is it's just another form of grief. Like grief is going to exist for everybody in all kinds of ways. And I think sometimes when we sort of say like, oh, this is more the phrase in psychobabble land is complicated grief,
Hmm.
is like, oh, this is, this is a different kind of grief. And then I think what happens for the person living with it is it becomes one more thing they have to deal with and one more thing they have to overcome, rather than making it almost simpler to say, yes, like, this is truth. I did not get what I deserved from this person. And now that they're at this stage of life, that is never going to happen. I think where acceptance is really hard for people is this idea that we assume acceptance means I'm saying it's okay. So acceptance sometimes subtly or underneath gets misassumed as permission. If I accept that my mom is incapable, if I accept that my dad is incapable, I am somehow saying that that is okay. And so people become resistant to acceptance because they don't want to imply permission. But if we can say acceptance actually looks like naming the truth. My emotionally limited parent could not take care of me. And
Hmm.
as a result, I have been impacted in the following ways. I am a people pleaser. I struggle advocating for myself, or I fly off the handle. I shoot first and I ask questions later. I have a hard time with emotional regulation. I struggle with depression. I struggle with anxiety as a result of how I was raised. It is so much easier to accept than say, and now this person is dying, or this person is ill or incapacitated, and all of that is still true. That's the movement, not I'm going to be okay, not permission, but just this person never could, never did, and it's still true. That is often, when we talk acceptance, an easier place for people to land than I'm accepting that I'm never going to get the parent I deserved.
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. And it sounds to me like even if it has to start later in life, that could be the first step towards healing and a sustained healing during a important transition in a family's life.
I think it's everything, because so much of trauma, here's the thing with trauma. The line that it's not me, it's not an original Heather Gray, but trauma is what happens in the absence of a witness. And one of the most profound examples of self-abandonment is when we refuse to witness ourselves. And so we are healing our trauma, even in the absence of community, even in the absence of a sibling witness or a friend or a neighbor in the area, when we say, yeah, that happened. Yes, I remembered the meds. I remembered the heating blanket. I remembered the dog needed to be walked. I did all these things, and then my mom still said, like, I'm not good enough because I didn't stay an extra 10 minutes. Yes, that there is an example of that very thing. I believe me. I'm not going to question those 10 minutes. I'm not going to think I should have stayed 10 minutes because then she would have known I really loved her. I am going to say I did all those things. I took care of the medicine. I took care of the food. I took care of the dog. I showed up. I stayed present. And yes, for my mom, that was still not good enough. Yes, that's true. I believe me.
It seems like you really should not get in that trap of grieving the fact that the emotional healing you wanted from someone else didn't come your way. It's really got to start with that
Hmm.
introspection, as you really well outline. And I think there's huge messaging there for our listeners, and that we need to be proactive and not mumble to ourselves, but talk to ourselves in a very, very meaningful and structured way that's compassionate,
Yes.
shows
Yes.
some grace, as many of our guests have alluded to before. Folks, we're going to take a brief break here and hear from our production team and be back with this amazing discussion that I think offers so much for our listeners today. We're really happy you're here with us today, Heather.
I just had like two sort of follow-up questions. I have a friend, and his mother isn't ill, but she's sort of in her late 70s, and she refuses to let him know or his brother know about her estate planning in any meaningful way. Like even like who the lawyer is or a number to call if something happens. She kind of dangles that she's looking for a power of health and a power of attorney, but she won't tell them who that's going to be. She's just sort of made it clear that it's not going to be either one of them, or maybe it will be, but they don't know. She's made these little off these little off comments about her will and who's getting what and who might not be getting what, and she's just not sure about who's going to be getting what, and that she may have to make changes. And so it leaves them in a position where they're feeling really uncertain. And this is a time when they also see their friends' families starting to pass. The parents are getting older. People are sort of passing all around them, and they don't have this certainty or any kind of reassurance about anything really. And it's something that they're really struggling with, and it feels a bit manipulative. From the outside looking at it, it feels like they're being really badly manipulated, and it's unfair. And that ultimately they may have to be sort of sorting this out when they're also trying to deal with the grief of the actual loss, which seems really unfair. And so I'm just wondering if that's something that you see that's common, because you mentioned it, earlier. You mentioned something about wills and financial manipulation. Is there something in that you could sort of speak to?
Yes. Welcome to my world. Yes, that is a thing. It's not a feeling manipulative thing. It is a manipulative thing. It is a strategy that emotionally limited people use to get the attention, it's the puppet move. It's I'm going to be the puppeteer, and I'm going to see how I can get all of you to dance, and how I can get you all to pay attention to me, and how I can get you all to nervously twitter and titter all around me and get you to dance and perform for me. It is designed to get a reaction, and it creates a reaction because estates are complicated. I live in California, and estate planning is insane. If you you want everything written down, and you want things in trust, because probate in California is rough. And so when you're a child and your parent is manipulating the crap out of you about this, you're thinking of two things. One is, am I going to be seen? I wasn't seen as a child in present day life. Is this meaning I'm not going to be seen as a child even after your death? But also, are you sticking me with this mess where I'm not going to know who to contact? I'm not going to know your wishes. I'm not going to know any of these things. And now, not only do I have to recover from my childhood with you, I have to recover with how hurtful and painful you've treated me in your death. It is absolutely a thing. It is common, and it happens more often than people talk about, because nobody likes talking about the will. Nobody likes being seen as a money grabber or anything like that. They worry about self-perception, but that creates more anxiety. The reality is we cannot control the other person. There is no perfect script, no perfect way of responding that allows us to guarantee without absolute certainty we're not going to be misunderstood, that the person's going to see our intention. So this is when we say, I am going to give you all of the information you need, and then I'm going to stop talking. So mom, or, this idea of your friend saying, so mom or dad or whoever it is, I see that you want to keep a tight lid on this. I respect that you want this to be in your control. I need you to know that if you don't share with me, I will just do my best after you leave us to make the decisions that are right for you. And we'll have to hope that need gets met, and then disengage.
There is that element of erasure that you mentioned, though, where it's like you don't quite exist in the final testament of this person's life. you're not going to be recognized, even if you were there. You put your dues
Yes.
in, and you really made deposits into that relationship, but you may not actually be recognized at all.
Yes.
And so I guess
Yes.
and then there's also, and you alluded to this, being called like a money grubber, or, I know my friend has been, I think at one point, his mom said to him, "You're only concerned about money. That's the only thing you care about,"
Yes.
which couldn't be further from the truth from this person, but automatically puts him
Yes.
back on his back foot.
Yes.
So, um, but all of this, I think,
Yes.
for me, brought up the fact that likely kids have been caregiving, at least on an emotional and psychological level, for their parents their entire lives. Right. So
Yes.
there's that expectation that they're going to be there at the end, probably comes from the fact that they're buffering things, or they're, making sure things are okay, or they're protecting the family in the way that the child can. Um, it's just,
Yes.
it's fascinating. I don't.
That is real and true and makes so much sense to me. That is exactly how it goes down. That is exactly the experience.
Thanks for answering my question.
Folks, we're back from the break. We've had an amazing, engaging discussion with Heather Gray today. Heather, many caregivers would say, I'm still being emotionally harmed by the person I'm keeping alive.
Yes.
Like, how common is that? And how do you
Yes.
know as a caregiver when that's actually happening?
Your body tells you. I think this so often, one of the things that happens is, an adult, an emotionally limited person will throw a one-liner at and throw a zinger at. And it'll be so easy for the adult child to be like, oh, they didn't mean it. They're just tired. They're just this. And it's, well, no, actually, they said it. They meant it. They got the reaction out of it. So much of it is acknowledging the one-liners that come their way and not responding and not engaging with them and saying, yes, that happened again. Wow, that was hurtful. Yes. And then you're engaging in the re-choosing to take care of this person. One of the things that's been missing from this conversation is the idea that some adult children choose not to. And that is okay. They can
Choose
even
not to what?
start
Not to reframe the whole cognitive
not
approach to dealing with it?
no, not to take care of the adult parent. To
Mm.
say, like, no, I actually can't. Because what happens to someone who doesn't have kids and there's no obvious person? All the systems figure it out somehow. A lot of adult children think they're doing this because they have to. But if they were suddenly hit by a bus, incapacitated, had something happen to them, the whole world would figure out how that adult who is carrying and ailing, what happens to them and what goes on next. There is no qualifier that says you absolutely have to be doing this. That's why I said earlier, like, make sure you're choosing this. Like, you can say, I'm doing this because of my values. I'm doing this, and the example, around like some financial gain. A lot of grandparents, for example, make deposits into college funds for the grandkids. And so if your child is one of the people who has a college fund in place, you might do caregiving, not to take care of the adult, but to make sure your kids can go to school in the way that you want them to. You can make that choice from all kinds of places, but you also get to not make that choice. And that sometimes reminding yourself of that, to say, not every adult child says yes to this. Not every adult child goes along with it. Sometimes that is the act of reclamation of why they're there, why they're doing it, or it gives them permission to say no for a day. It gives them permission to say no for a week. It gives them permission. And when we can create that kind of space and help someone of sound mind and body know that they're not being controlled, they're not trapped, there's an element of choice there, then they can stop abandoning themselves. I think it's so important to recognize that what is being asked of adult children of emotionally limited parents is an incredibly big ask. Some people say no, thank you. And that is okay. And that is a choice they can make. And if you are saying yes, then be clear with yourself as to why, rather than having that be defined by the person you're taking care of.
With in that sense of, well, this is an inalienable duty that
Mhm.
you owe. It's just not the case.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
I'm struck by
Yes.
that notion where you get to that cognitive comfort level where you can say, oh, this is happening again. Yeah, I see it. I'm not going there. I'm going to parcel that away because this is not how I want to be. But before you get to that point, you're getting all of the visceral symptoms in those moments, the chest tightness, the thumps, the pounding
Mhm.
headache, everything tensing up. What can we
Yes.
do as we work through that process? Because many things, it's a process. It's not an overnight switch that suddenly you're capable and empowered.
Yes.
What are some of the exercises we can do? Is it resetting vagal tone in those moments? What do you recommend for your listeners?
I think it's really hard to reset vagal tone if you've never heard of vagal tone. Like I don't think we go there unless that is part of your regular everyday vernacular. What's most important is what are the known ways now that are healthy, reliable, and make you feel good when you're taking care of yourself. So who are your people? Who are your circle? Who are going to be your witnesses? Who are going to help you help the person? What needs do you have met? Do you need to make, are you somebody who, if you go to the gym regularly, as long as you go to the gym, you're fine? It's, speaking of caregiving, my husband, this probably isn't in your notes or on your show. It doesn't come up very often, but my husband is in a wheelchair and has a disability. He was injured in our dating life. And when he was ill, so he got hurt in 2005, and then he got really, really sick in 2015. And he was sick for a majority of the year, and most of that time was in the hospital. It was like recognizing that as a caregiver, I really needed somebody to make me healthy food because I lived in Boston at the time, and everything around the hospital was crap. And I just wanted to eat good food. And so it's saying, like, oh, I can do this caregiving thing, but I really need somebody to please make me a healthy meal. Or for me at the time, I remember one of the things I did is I couldn't take my gym classes at the time that I normally took them because I had to adjust my work schedule in order to be there for my husband. So I asked one of the gym instructors if he would meet with me early and do, personal training with me an hour ahead. I identified television shows that I really, really regulated me and took care of me and
Made you
nurtured
laugh?
me and made me laugh or helped me cry. And I made sure that they were in the DVR and available. So much of it is this is happening to me, and it is awful, and it is hard, and it is creating big feelings. What do I need? And will I give myself permission to need them and to take them? And when you're raised by an emotionally limited person, that is a foreign concept. It has never occurred to you that you can raise your hand and ask for help, that it doesn't have to be you doing everything. You can ask a spouse, you can ask a friend. At one point, my husband was super, super sick, and it was one of those things where we kept thinking he was going to get better. And I had tickets to Brene Brown, who I just adore. And I really, really wanted to see her, but my husband was in the hospital. And I just knew that I didn't know when he was going to get well, but I couldn't turn down one more thing. So I said to a friend, I really want to go to this thing and I'm going to go. Will you sit with my husband while I go take care of myself in this other way? And we can do that for ourselves regardless of our relationship when we're taking care of someone. It's what do I need? And will I give myself permission for that need to get met? That was a long
It's
answer.
really
Sorry.
interesting. No, it's plus, those are that was a high quality experience that you got that was really important for you. But I was thinking about that line and what sort of demarcates between caregiving stress and the stress that comes with caregiving and ongoing emotional abuse. And I think it really involves that fact that you can be really stressed caregiving, but you can find the permission. But when it crosses the line into abuse, the immature parent will look you in the eye and say, you will never have permission.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And then you
So,
boundary up.
so a lot of
Yes.
online advice these days around, emotionally immature parents says, we should just go no contact.
Yeah.
And you alluded to that a little bit. I can't do this, but maybe that's an option earlier in life. There's a lot of the no contact, and there's, these sort of narcissistic trait influenced behaviors in relationships and things like that. But when you're the only caregiver for an elderly parent who's in the final stage of life, it's not often realistic to be able to go
Yes.
no contact, if at all
Yes.
possible. It
Yes.
almost feels like a nuclear option.
Yes.
How should people think about that? And how do you navigate from no contact to maybe low contact?
Yes.
And
Yes.
how do you, those are rocky waters.
Really rocky and super personal, and usually happen when the nervous system can't keep going on as it's gone on. The biggest thing here that I think we sometimes miss forest for trees is that if you're agreeing to a caregiving relationship, just do the caregiving. You don't have to do the relationship part. There is no sort of stated expectation that you have to talk to the person, that you have to stay in conversation, you have to share your life with someone who hasn't shown respect for the things you share. I really hate all of the jargon that people use, especially around narcissism, like the gray rocking and the yellow rocking and all of that nonsense. I think it makes it so clickbaity and sensationalized for things that are really, really painful. But you can share less, give less of yourself, talk to the person you're taking care of as if they're the clerk at the grocery store. A lot of times we show up in these moments in that oh, I'm taking care of my mom, so I'm the daughter and I'm caring for my mom. This mother, this woman in front of you has not been your mother your whole life. She has not raised you. She has not taken care of you. She has not met your needs. So no, you don't have to engage in a mother relationship with someone who wasn't a good mom to you. You can be like the Instacart delivery person to say, here's your medicine, here's this, here's that. You don't have to give more of yourself that's only going to be ignored, stepped on, disrespected. You
Chewed,
can do the caregiving part, and then you can get out.
spat up. Yep.
Yes.
I hear you. So in those circumstances, you come to realize that you can't change the parent and you may not be able to leave entirely, but for your own sanity, where does the real work begin? Is it just, and you alluded to this way at the beginning of the conversation today, is it delving into thinking a little bit about the fact that the childhood your parents had probably didn't equip them to be the parents you needed for you? And that in accepting their limits and tempering your expectations, maybe you can find some peace.
Yes. Yes. So much of this is recognizing peace is never going to come from the other person. And that's true in any toxic relationship, not just parents. I think there's toxic friendships, there's toxic romantic relationships, toxic work relationships, that no matter what you do, some people are incapable. So all you can do is recognize how you showed up, that you did your best, given the tools, the knowledge, and the resources that you had at any given point in time. And sometimes you have less resources or tools on a Monday, and then you have more capacity and more tools available to you on a Wednesday if you got more sleep or you ate really well or you had a good workout. But so much of it is I believe me about my experience. And yes, I deserved better. And yes, I deserved a whole heck of a lot more than I got. I believe me. And as a result of my experience, I need certain things. I can no longer tolerate certain things. I'm sensitive to certain things, and I'm going to listen to myself. But one of the things that happens more often than not is all these feelings come up. Guilt comes up, shame comes up, anger, resentment, sadness, depression. And the person doing the caregiving shoves them aside and says, "It isn't your turn. Why are you feeling that? You shouldn't be thinking that. You shouldn't be doing that." When in reality, that is exactly what it was like growing up to have feelings in that house. And instead of treating yourself with all your feelings and all of your experiences in the same way your parents did, instead you say, "Oh, what are you so mad about? What are you freaking out about right now? Tell me, what's so sad about this for you? I want to know. I'm going to listen to you. We're going to hang out. I want to know what it is you have to tell me, and I'm going to believe you." And you listen to those hurting parts that are coming up. But she never saw me, and she didn't come to my recital, and I got straight A's 3 times in a row. And the only time I ever heard anything from my father is when I got an A minus. And yeah, you're right. That is so true. And now he's in front of you and he needs help getting his bedpan changed. And that sucks. And that is rude. And that is unfair. And you don't deserve this. And I believe you. Treating all of those parts with the exact opposite of how you were treated and talked to and how your feelings were treated, that's where the power and healing comes from. I believe you. These feelings, I'm going to listen to you. You were allowed to be here. You were not inconvenient. I don't need to regulate you. I trust you. I believe you. I'm going to take care of you. That is.
That kind of self-talk sounds like the antidote to the inner critic. If ever there was one. And if ever there needed to be one, and if there was a time where you needed one at such a crucial time when you're called to caregive in such a situation, that's where it gets called into play. I mean, it really sort of sets the stage for allowing a caregiver to accept and care for the patient or the parent for who they truly are.
Yes, because our inner critic is our inner protector. Our inner critic is beating the crap out of us first so someone else doesn't do it. That's what that's all about. It's the warning signal of, hey, if you don't toe the line, if you're not perfect, if you don't do this, I am going to make you so afraid of the next thing that happens, because that's the socially acceptable feeling. That's how you get the grades. That's how you get the gold star. So our inner critic is protecting us. So when it's telling us we didn't do it good enough and we should have lowered our voice, or we talked too soon, or we talked too late, if we say, hey, I know, we're in slippery waters right now. This person has the capacity to really hurt us. And yes, we're taking care of them anyway. And yes, we know they're going to hurt us, but we're going to armor up. We're not going to open up and give as much. Then that voice, in the same way, starts to get a little bit lower, because it sees that you're on it and that you're protecting yourself and you're taking care of yourself and you've got this. Exactly.
So, I think it's really important for listeners to realize that emotional healing will never come from the parent. And we're always asking ourselves, well, where could it come from? And it probably needs to, as you well pointed out, come within. How does an adult child start meeting those old unmet needs in healthier ways to build a relationship with the time they have left with their parent that's achievable and possible?
I don't think they have to do it in that time frame. They might not be able to do it in their time frame. A lot of the women I meet find me after their mom has died. Because it hasn't been safe to have a conversation about who their mother was and how their mother was until after their moms have died. And even then, they're like looking around the corner, they're feeling guilty, they're feeling bad, they're speaking the unmentionable. I think so much of this healing piece is it happens when it feels safe enough to happen. So for some people who have really been held down and minimized and made small and hurt by their abusers, that's not going to happen until the threat has passed, or 2 years after the threat has passed.
In that final chapter of a parent's life, what does the healthiest form of relationship look like? if the parent is never going to become who you needed. If we had to sort of encapsulate that as one sort of parting feeling from today's discussion or parting image, what's that healthiest state that can still exist, even though you know they're never going to be who you needed?
I think it's whatever feels real and true, that like I can show up in this way, and doing this is not an act of self-abandonment. So for example, I run a group I run a therapy group for daughters, and we just had a daughter whose mom died. And she had been no contact or low contact with her mom for years and years before mom died. She had put her mom in a care facility, so the care facility was largely taking care of her. She had hired a medical liaison who was communicating between the facility and her. And then in group, another daughter shared, well, I didn't have a good relationship with my mom, but I went there when she was dying. I was in the room, and then other daughters shared how, based on what felt real and true for them at different moments in their life, being there for their mother, what was honest, and recognizing that that is a really personal choice. But when it comes from what feels real and true and possible and meets our capacity of our nervous system, then we're showing some self-respect. When we're doing it to control a narrative, sometimes that's the best we can do, because that's meeting ourselves where we're at too. But we're going to acknowledge that, to say, I'm not even sure I want to be here, but I'm going to be here on the off chance. And being as honest as you can with where you're at, and recognizing that might shift and move and change shape. And there's no straight lines, and this is hurtful and messy and hard, and we can hold all of the hurt and messy and hard, and be witnessed in it. That is the most powerful thing, is to let yourself be seen in that place, not by someone who's going to hurt you, not by your abuser, not by your emotionally limited parent, but by the people who have been capable of seeing you all along.
You've taught me a lot today. We've had such an amazing conversation, and I appreciate you being here. We hear so much buzz term around, self-care, and I've used it, I champion it, but self-care that's not informed with self-honesty, as you so beautifully point out, is not self-care at all.
Exactly.
So on that note, I'd like to thank you and wrap up today's episode of the Caregivers podcast, and invite listeners everywhere to think about self-honesty.
Yes.
We'll see you again next week. Take care. Before we wrap up, I wanted to remind you of something important. The conversations you hear on this podcast are here to inform, to support, to spark reflection. They're not a substitute for professional medical advice, care, therapy, or crisis services. Listening to this podcast does not create a doctor-patient or caregiver-client relationship between us. If you're facing a medical concern, health challenge, a mental health challenge, or a caregiving situation that needs guidance, I encourage you to reach out to a qualified professional who knows your story. If you're ever in crisis, please don't wait. Call your local emergency number or recognize crisis hotline right away. You deserve real-time help and support. The views you hear on this show, whether from me or my guests, are our own. They don't necessarily reflect any organizations we work with, or are part of, or have worked with, or been part of in the past. This podcast is an independent production. It's not tied to any hospital, university, or healthcare system. Thank you for being here, for listening, and most of all, for taking the time to care for yourself while you continue to care for others. I look forward to hearing from you.